Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to give you the opportunity to ask all the questions you have not yet been able to ask. And I'm looking forward to invite two more experts to this discussion who have been so kind to agree to answer all your questions together with Mr. Biege. A very warm welcome again, the interim CEO Gaia-X Aisbl, Mr. Hubert Tadieu, and Mr. Professor Boris Otto from the Fraunhofer Institute. Hello. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And let me now have a look if we have already received any questions from you. So, someone wants to know, can a not EU company, company join Gaia-X? If yes, who is the sovereign of the data? I hand over to you.
So let me answer to this question, which I understand has been posed many times since yesterday morning. I guess anyone in the world welcome to join Gaia-X Aisbl as a partner. The way it will work, the General Assembly will be composed of all these partners. At this point of time, we have already 181. As Fabian has just said, we will reopen at the beginning of January for what we have called the Day 2 members. The restriction we have decided is that we ask that only companies which have their headquarters in Europe can provide the board members. That has been a long discussion which has been decided, meaning that those partners which do not have their headquarters in Europe are absolutely welcome in all the technical works, in all the working groups. They are also welcome to give their voice to the General Assembly, but we have limited to companies which have their headquarters based in Europe the ability to have their board members as part of the board of directors to be elected next June.
Perhaps I can comment on the second part of the question as well, which basically was related to the question of ownership over data. As we all know, if we use the notion data ownership in a legal perspective, it's of course not an easy thing to do. But if it refers to the question who is in control over their own data, that is exactly what Gaia-X is all about, right? So Gaia-X, as an association and also as a community, will not own the data, right? The ownership or the control, the sovereignty over the data remains with the data creator or the data provider, of course. So that's one of the fundamental ideas and also rationales upon which Gaia-X is resting.
Thank you. So next question is, how can an implementation that is compatible with the architectural principles be validated? What will be the process of acceptance?
Yeah, I think perhaps I can start to respond to that. It was briefly outlined also this morning or over lunch or before lunch, I believe, in the presentation that Ronnie and Pierre gave, when they illustrated a little bit the overall process, which basically starts with implementations of open services and then basically their, let's call it, registration in a catalog. And in that process, we would of course also make sure that certain validation procedures will be in place. And then also remember what Pierre and also Ronnie said, there will also be the need of certification to a certain extent. Of course, and that has been discussed yesterday by the high-level expert scholars that we invited. It is important that we make sure that compliance can be assured, because that is a trust anchor. But on the other hand, the entry barriers in order to be compliant are as low as possible. That means that we will let the certification base on two fundamental principles. First of all, we would of course like to make use of as much of certification which is already out there. And we have referred in the morning to C5 certification, for example, that has been mentioned a couple of times. So we want to make use of, let's say, the things that are there already in order to be fast. And the other pillar on which certification rests is automation, right? So if a certification would require enormous manual activities related to a certain significant cost amount, this is not what low entry barrier means, right? Therefore, we need to make sure, as I said, that certification and therefore also the attestation of compliance, if you want to call it like that, rests on things that are already there and on as much automation as we can.
Thank you very much. Is there going to be a common repository for open source components developed for Gaia-X?
Yes, I can start, and then I'd like to also hand over to Fabian, because it's basically the task that you took up. So in the end, as mentioned earlier, well, opportunities and also the big advantages of our initiative, that we create a powerful open source community, and also as a result of that, an open source repository which implements the Federation services, but also services that might go beyond. Of course, we are all not naive, and we all know that open source is, of course, let's say, free to take up, but it's not for free to get it, right? It's lots of effort related with such an endeavor. And we are well aware of that. And but on the other hand, in my personal opinion, this is one of the biggest opportunities to embark on. As mentioned earlier, Fabian, and together with Michael Joachim, are driving forward, let's say, our strategy on open source. And therefore, Fabian, I'd like to give the word to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being able to compliment. So with Gaia-X, we very early committed to the principles of open source, and we are driving for that ambition, which is also not the least the reason why we have established an Aisbl as a legal representation of Gaia-X. Because if you want to go open source, we learned that you need a very stable basis and very stable fundament on the legal side, but also in terms of structures, in terms of tooling, in terms of processes. And we are currently implementing the first building blocks of these open source processes. So in our community, in the working groups, we for sure share openly all the results, and you can openly discuss. And we want to extend that also to the broader community in the course of 2021, also with open source OSS processes, like you know them from the established foundations, and we will let you know in early 2021 how that will be realized in Gaia-X.
How can an implementation that is compatible with the architectural principles be validated? What will be the process of acceptance?
I think it's similar to the one question that we got. I mean, it's relating to the validation and the certification process. Perhaps I can add a couple of further comments on that, which are related to how this entire certification model in the end really works, right? I mean, if we assume that we would end up like with a digital certificate or a token, which basically is a proof point of a successful pass of the validation or certification process, then we usually are ending up with questions like, well, okay, who's basically the owner? Or who's basically the authority who's able to issue such a certificate, right? And as I mentioned yesterday, I believe the the association, so the Gaia-X Aisbl, should really focus on the core things to do, and focus mainly on the things that can only be there once. And of course, as you can imagine, there can only be one authority in the world that is able to hold the ownership about, let's say, this process of being able to mandate the issuing of digital certificates. So, which is basically called the certification authority, right? And that is something that the Gaia-X Aisbl will take over. However, I mentioned that we want to automate certification as much as we can. That means that we also need test facilities, or let's say certification facilities, and these can be run by various parties. I mean, that have of course to qualify for this task, but the certification bodies, so to say, we will see probably many of them who are able to basically attest that a certain service which pretends to be adhering to the Gaia-X architecture actually does so. And so they will basically be responsible for offering the facility to do the tests. And once this is documented, based on the final decision of the Aisbl, a digital certificate or a token can be issued, which basically proves that the process has successfully been passed.
Thank you. The word edge is used in different contexts. What exactly is the edge? Yeah, does it include on-prem that abide by Gaia-X rules for sharing data externally?
Yeah, I can perhaps respond with a typical use case that we are hearing quite often. And perhaps if time allows, I'd like to stress that a little bit, because the point in, let's say, the development of cloud computing is similar to a situation that we had back in the early 1990s, when many large user companies were at the point of migrating from a very fragmented mainframe-driven IT landscape towards something that was called business process standardization, or also standard application software, like ERP systems, for example. And that was, of course, a very, very strategic decision to take. And I feel that we are at a similar point in time today, where cloud computing is not such something for peripheral services, but large portions, large amounts of the value creation processes are moving into the cloud. And then, of course, the question is, how does the cloud look like, right? And what we see is, let's say, that it will be a combination of relatively large cloud service centers. If you are a global company, perhaps like, I don't know, 4 or 5 in each region. But of course, due to the fact that you want to process data where it is, that you basically have physical and also economic constraints, which prevent you from moving everything into a large cloud data center, you would want to build up a number of edge cloud centers, which basically provide data processing, but also computing power on a relatively local level. And to respond to this question, what we also see is that that the cloud computing is now, well, both facing to the inside of a company, but also to the outside. And that goes back to what we discussed earlier when we talked about ecosystems. You know, the boundaries of a company are blurring, and therefore cloud computing, or let's say, to be more precise, a combination of edge cloud and cloud computing is considered, well, a strategic pathway, both for making the internal IT landscape future-proof, but also being able to be ready to embark in ecosystems and data sharing upon data spaces, right?
If I may add a few words to what Boris said, by the end of March 2021, we will have a specific webinar about Edge Cloud. We know what are the basic data for Edge Cloud. In 5 years from now, 80% of data will be stored on the edge and 20% in the central cloud. That's the first thing. But the second thing, which is key, is the reason why those data will be stored in the edge is to guarantee low latency and quick response time. And this is coming absolutely hand in hand with the development of the 5G. So we will see probably a combination of telecom operators and cloud service provider. As opposed to the rest of the cloud technology, this part of edge cloud is really new. A lot of things needs to be invented in terms of architecture. And we believe that Europe is very well placed in terms of industry definition of the requirement for this edge cloud. Therefore, it is key that as Gaia-X, Aisbl, we embark very quickly into defining the requirement for edge cloud, because we have many of the users which need that capability, which translate into a very simple requirement. If you have a factory which is having all kind of automation and tools, under which circumstances can you be sure that if you pass some part of the current processing into the cloud, you will keep your performance, you will keep your security, you will keep your sovereignty. And that is a domain where Europe need absolutely to take the leadership.
Is there going to be a common repository for open source components developed for Gaia-X?
Personally, I think it's something that is not, of course, decided yet. But if you ask me, I would probably think that it will be this way, definitely, because I think a central repository has many advantages in terms of, let's say, being one place, so to say, where, let's say, all Gaia-X related open source developments come together. I think also in the past, it's something that has been proven useful. Of course, there are options, let's say, like to basically merge repositories into one central one. But I believe that there will be, let's say, one central repository for Gaia-X. But again, as said, since this is also Fabian's task, I'd like also to give you the chance, Fabian, to comment on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So again, as I have already said, we are committed to share our code, also open source, with the community. And I think we first need to distinguish there are central assets Gaia-X is, as an organization, as an initiative, is building in the core, the federation services, and they will be certainly shared and also be able to be contributed in an open source process. And then you have assets that are not in the center of our work as an Aisbl or the Gaia-X community. So you have definitely innovative services which are coming out or are coming from Gaia-X partners, but which will not be shared as an open source, because those are the differentiating factors also for your own business, your USPs, if you want to tell it that way. And for the federation services, what we are aiming for is something which we have already seen now with the Corona app, for instance, where you on the one hand side had a funded project to be able to move fast and to act very quickly, but we have at least a very early feedback process, open source. But then in the course of next year, we will certainly also establish this common open source process as you are used to it. And I think that can be a deep dive or a topic for a deep dive session then in, I think spring is realistic, where we then share more details how that will work.
Is there already an agreed business plan related to the costs of the activities of Gaia-X?
Yeah. Perhaps Hubert, you can start and then I can comment on it.
Yes.
That's a CEO question, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Boris. What I would like to say, you can look at business plan for an association like Gaia-X in many angles. The first angle is to be sure that the association in itself has the means to develop the ambitious goal we have described during these 2 days. On that respect, I can tell you that the fact that we are now 181 members is giving us the financial resources to act as we have planned, meaning that we are in a position to have the team which is necessary to do that. But I guess the question of which was asked was another one. Are we sure that what we are developing will find its market? And in that respect, I would like to call back into the presentation which was given yesterday afternoon and to insist on the fact that what has been proposed by Bosch is a very interesting model, out of which what we are saying is that the value we are creating ahead of time, like it was the case for the regions which were creating railways, we have an idea that the kind of ballpark estimate is in the range of 10 to 30 billion euro, as it was said yesterday. And we are absolutely happy, and this was shown yesterday, to say to the public investors in the first place, and you have heard Thierry Breton saying he would put 2 billion from European Commission, he will ask member states to put another 2 billion and private company to complement to a total of 10 billion euro. We are in this kind of estimate. And the question is really that we can prove that the development we are doing are the proper return on investment. And that is why this idea of tokenomics to measure the progress of the usage of what we have defined could prove to be extremely interesting. We will discuss it with the European Commission. We hope they will accept to consider that way of thinking. We are looking for sharing means, sharing resource, sharing data. So we need to give us objective and to be able to measure whether we have accomplished the objective we have given to ourselves. Boris,
perhaps I can also add a couple of thoughts on that, because when talking about the business model of Gaia-X, it's important to perhaps underpin once more what the Gaia-X Association will not do. And what Gaia-X is not about is creating a monolithic cloud platform. And the Gaia-X Association will also not be a cloud provider. What we will do is basically set a standard, an architectural standard for a federated data infrastructure. And I'd like to stress that once more, because when we talk about business models, we should rather think of, let's say, what's the business model of an infrastructure, as Hubert just pointed out when he referred once more to the railway example. And that's what we have at hand, right? It's not our ambition to build a cloud service provider. And it's also not our ambition, and I'd like to make that crystal clear, to interfere with any business model in the market. The market should do that, but the market should be able to use easy to use, low entry barrier, non-discriminatory federated data infrastructure. And this is, let's say, the scene in which we basically are operating, and also in which we talk about, let's say, and the business model of Gaia-X. Of course, if you are an infrastructure provider, you also need to cover your costs, and it's also good to have a little margin in order to be, let's say, ready for risk that might occur in the future. But again, Gaia-X as an association will set the standard, will make sure that, let's say, the core services, the federation services, are implemented as open source for everybody to be taken up. So the users and providers of the infrastructure, but will not do it by itself. And then basically the association is the one who basically, as I mentioned yesterday, tells good from bad. So basically plays police, if you want to call it like that, or the technical inspection authorities, the TÜV in Germany, who give you, let's say, the sticker and tell you, okay, this car is ready to run on the street, stuff like that. But and that is always why I feel it's important to really differentiate about what we talk when we talk about business models in this field, right? And once more, the Gaia-X Association will not interfere with any individual business model. That's not our purpose, right?
Next question is also a real interesting one. India seems to be a natural partner of Gaia-X. Which arguments can be raised to get Indian side on board through an Indian national Gaia-X hub?
Can I take this one? Because India was not a country which has been approaching us to be part of Gaia-X. Okay, we can say that China is part of Gaia-X through two companies, one which is Alibaba, a cloud service provider, and one which is Huawei, an equipment manufacturer. In the same way, Japan is part of Gaia-X through Fujitsu. We will be very happy to welcome companies from India, but until now, we do not have any request in that matter, okay? So it could be the case that when Gaia-X will have covered the 27 member states, that we will have spare time to address India. But for the time being, it is clear that our priority will be to have every of the 27 member states to be integrated in Gaia-X before spending a lot of time to convince India to join. But if India is willing to join, they will be very welcome, as we have done for China and for Japan.
Yeah, I can imagine that perhaps, of course, that's very much welcome, as Hubert said. Of course, there are lots of relationships already ongoing, for example, in the area of Industry 4.0, where also, let's say, on a strategic level, our cooperations are already set up. I basically refer to the Make in India strategy, in line with which basically there were many cooperations, at least from the German government, also maintained to the Indian government, and those are probably good assets to build upon, right? But Fabian, do you want to add on this, because you're also activities in Germany? Anything to add from your side?
I think I've rarely something to add. So Hubert already pointed it out very nicely. We welcome any country and any partners that are committed to our goals, committed to our values, being it in India or any other countries. But as you rightly said, for Industry 4.0, we already have an established partnership we can certainly build on. And so if you have a link or connections to India, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.
What functionality will the Gaia-X Aisbl operated service catalog provide?
Well, perhaps if I can start responding to that. The good thing is, as mentioned earlier, that with today, it's not the start of, let's say, the technical work in that sense. But there has been already much achieved over the last month, and I'd like to point you to also the work that Pierre and also Ronnie presented, I think, earlier today before lunch. And I think it is important when we talk about the federated catalog that we make sure, and I think they demonstrated that very nicely how this could look like, that Gaia-X compliant services are, of course, asked and also required for a self-description, which basically refer to the specifications and the standards that they support. On top of that, also referring to geographical locations or information, if, let's say, the question is affected where certain services run and where data is stored. And what I found very impressive today was that they also showed nicely how, let's say, the different regulation specifications can be nested, right? Remember when they showed one service that basically uses another infrastructure service, which again is basically making use of other specifications. And that's basically the way to go, which is very much in line with the idea of an architecture of standards. And of course, the Gaia-X federated catalog will be able to create transparency about which specifications certain services are resting on and which rules they are complying to. So you can basically trust in, let's say, the compliance to a certain legal or regulatory regime. And that is something, and that was also mentioned, which will be, let's say, available through what was earlier today called a portal, but is one of the core functionalities of the federated catalog service that is specified in the Gaia-X federation services.
And the last question is, how can Day 1 members contribute to the Aisbl working groups?
Okay, I would like to start answering that question and to go back a little bit to what Fabian has presented. We have said that after June 2021, there will be absolutely no difference between the founding members and the Day 1 members, and we have met our commitment. Now, the phase in which we are entering now will be that the 159 new Day 1 members will progressively join the group which have been described by Boris. And what is extremely important for us is that the organization we have set up all together during summer prove to be solid enough to be multiplied by 7 in one shot. And I can tell you, we have been working very carefully about that. So in the next few weeks, and that was mentioned by Boris and Alban, we will gradually welcome members of every of the Day 1 member in order to accomplish all the tasks that you have understood by now are very numerous, but we need to do it in an organized way where we keep the consistency of the approach while everyone can contribute through a community model. Boris, please complete.
Yes, so of course, everyone is open and also invited to collaborate and to contribute basically immediately. Let's really face it. On the other hand, I also mentioned that we are in this, let's say, transition from a startup initiative towards something that follows consistent processes, let's call it like that. We have already, and also to give that information in the committees, in particular in the interim technical committee, because it has a broader range, as I outlined earlier on. We have assigned, let's say, the working group heads. So I referred to these 6 columns, if you remember, and these heads are assigned, and they are now in the process of preparing everything to be ready to, for the community of Day 1 members to collaborate and to contribute. So if you have detailed questions on that, please reach out to me or to Alban. As I said, we have set up, let's say, the structure to how to be ready and also on an efficient basis to organize the collaboration. If you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. But as Fabian said, it's of course clear that contribution is appreciated very much immediately, because as you have heard from Fabian, we will have important milestones upcoming already in the next, in the first quarter of 2021, of course. Right?
A big thank you to Boris, Hubert and Fabian. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 intensive days with the Gaia-X Summit lie behind us. Do you want to join us on this journey? You will find our contact in your talk inbox. And the international team of Gaia-X is looking forward to having an inspiring exchange with all of you. And naturally, after the official part now, you're also invited to exchange with the other participants in the talk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much to each and every one of you for your participation there. You know, discussing about visions is important, but to really change and move things, action is needed. So now, ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn to do, move and act. I'm looking forward to this. Have a great day and goodbye.